Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with more NFL news. Unfortunate NFL news, but it happens every year around the draft time and the scouting combine. So right after the Super Bowl, so a couple like maybe last week, anonymous scouts or a scout labeled Shador as brash and arrogant. And when I saw this article, the first thing I thought about was TI addresses. Put an address on it. It always has to be anonymous and probably somebody that's probably not credible or somebody who doesn't know, understand the culture or understand different cultures. Someone who is lacks cultural awareness. Um, just because you're confident doesn't mean you're cocky. Um, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but it just kind of, like I said, it gets irritating every year. They do it for all a bunch of players, and I'll go into the different players in a little bit. But secondly, I also thought about um, scouts going through anonymity should be able to disclose themselves, or just we don't want to hear your words because we want to see what your resume is, what your credibility is, what players have you put out there, because the combine is not a barometer uh, in most cases for most of these players. It's just something to confirm what they saw on the tape, something to just make them feel better about their picks, but it doesn't really guarantee anything. We know that. But just getting back to the process and how degrading the process is for these NFL scouts, there was a lot of players. So when you think about a Kyler Murray, they question his leadership just because of the interviews that he had. Some of these players don't interview well. Some of these players never had a real job in their lives. They never had to interview for anything. When you played football in Little League, you didn't have to interview. When you played football in middle school, you didn't have to interview. You had to try out. High school, college, you didn't have to interview for these things. So some of these players, this is their first interviews. So of course they might seem uninterested or displeased or disengaged. They might feel that way. It's a lot. They have doctors testing them. They got to go through all these drills, go through all these interviews. The general public don't want to hear this stuff because they're going to be making all this money. But you have to think about the human side and people's mental health as well. It's not just about the money. The money doesn't escape the general stress that you have in life. Actually, it probably creates it more than helps it, actually, in some cases. But Kyler Murray, they questioned his leadership. Cam Newton, they questioned his leadership, as well as issues with his father taking money, allegedly, when he was in college. And they questioned his maturity and things like that. Even when he was in the NFL, Baker Mayfield, they questioned his leadership ability and immaturity, even though he was arrested like freshman year in college for like a DU, well, for being under the influence of alcohol and being jacked up by a law enforcement. So they questioned him, and then recently they questioned Shador just being brash and said he's arrogant, which you know that's very subjective and depending on how lack of how insecure you are or lack of confidence that you have, you might see a lot of people as arrogant. So, like I said, put an address on it. Who are you? What are your credentials? What cultural awareness that you have for the situation? And just to think about these teams spend an exorbitant amount of money on scouting anyway. So why do they need extra influence from any other kind of sources? They already have dedicated millions and millions of dollars to the budget for the scouting. Why do they need an additional ear? Most of these scouts don't get it right every year anyway. We know it's only a small percentage of these players actually stay on teams or actually become Hall of Fame level or even the level to, get a good second contract. So a lot of these scouts are inaccurate as well. So it's just a huge issue in the league right now. And I think that's why the combine is outdated and overrated for sure. Um, it's a dirty game with these scouts as well. So Emmanuel Acho from the FS1 Sports recently came out and said that when he was going through the interview process, he didn't name the team or the executive, but he said that they asked him, "Hey, tell me about your family." He said, "I come from a family of two parents that's been married for I think it was like 30 years at the time." He said, what have you been through? He was like, well, not a lot, just, my family been together and my dad worked his way up and yada, yada. And he says, well, you probably won't be good for our team. You haven't been through a lot, but you'll probably make a good leader for somebody one day. It just won't be us. So it's kind of crazy that just because he hasn't been through some kind of traumatic experience or some kind of crazy story, that they didn't want him. It's crazy to think about, right? You have a Cam Newton. They asked him, do you have any piercings or any tattoos? He said no. They said keep it that way. So he was playing for Carolina, and the owner allegedly asked him that. Dez Bryant, they asked him about his mother and his mother's past. It was I'm not going to talk about it, but you can look it up. It's on Google. It's very disturbing stuff. They asked him, and it's crazy that these owners were able to get away with this, or executives were able to get away with this. Now this stuff is all alleged, but it's very crazy just to think about that this stuff can even been a possibility. And I don't doubt these stories one bit. Um, but the combine to me, it seems very predatory in nature and very inhumane in very ways, just especially with the history of this country, the process of just lining players up and measuring them and doing all this different stuff. It just seems kind of crazy to me. Um, Even recently, when Jamie Foxx was on live with Jerry Jones and he was scouting the player and he shouted out the players uh, genital size. It was crazy to hear, and like I said, this stuff goes on all the time with these owners. It's just not publicized because they have all this power and influence and money, but the players are just treated like pieces of meat a lot of times, and it's very crazy just to think about. It still goes on in 2025. Um, but another reason why it's outdated and overrated because most of these former players and athletes already said that the film is more important and that you know the combine is just a confirmation of what they saw on tape. Like if you look fast on tape, they want to see how fast you run in real life. But it really is not a guarantee of any kind of placement or it's not certainty that anything is anything, because there's been a lot of players who did good at the combine, didn't turn out well in the league, and vice versa. Players that didn't do good at the combine and turned out to be great players, like Cam Newton. He said he didn't do well at the combine, and he was still the number one pick. Took a team to a Super Bowl, won a league MVP. So you know, it's not the end all be all for the NFL combine. It's basically turned down to a 40-yard dash track meet, for the most part. So it's just a way for the good old boys, the league owners, to just objectify players and flaunt their power for their fellow owners. But the NFL needs to find a better way to evaluate talent, and because this way that they're doing now is exploitive and over and counterproductive, I believe, for the most part. So as always, until next time, I'll see you next time.